In 2018, inflation in Venezuela hit an astonishing 700,000%. But the real horror wasn't just the money. A nation sitting on vast oil reserves was starving its own people. How did this happen? To understand the scale of this tragedy, look back decades. Venezuela was once the wealthiest economy in Latin America. It boasted the region's highest standard of living, a beacon of prosperity fueled by massive petroleum reserves. Between 2013 and 2020, the economy collapsed by 80%. This wasn't caused by war or natural disaster. It was a systematic destruction of productive capacity. How did a wealthy nation engineer its own ruin? The common narrative blames falling oil prices or international sanctions. Yet the true roots lie in ideological choices. Choices that began with a promise to eradicate poverty. But what if that promise required breaking the engine? Could a government expropriate thousands of businesses and expect prosperity? In 1999, 13,000 companies operated in Venezuela. By 2016, only 4,000 remained. Private enterprise was systematically dismantled. This wasn't just a policy shift, it was an ideological purge. The state oil company, PDVSA, was once a global powerhouse. After thousands of technical workers were replaced with political loyalists, oil production began a steep decline. With oil revenues squandered, the government needed to control remaining wealth. In 2003, strict currency controls were imposed to halt capital flight. Instead, they created a vast black market for dollars and chronic shortages. The bolivar was losing value daily. But the government's response was not to fix the economy. It was to print more money. Why would a nation choose hyperinflation over reform? The answer lies in political survival. What began as a revolution to uplift the poor ultimately required dismantling the nation's economic engine. The stage was set for a severe economic collapse. The illusion of endless wealth was cracked. In 1999, Hugo Chavez took power promising to redistribute Venezuela's vast oil wealth. What began as a socialist revolution would systematically dismantle the nation's productive capacity. The consequences would be devastating. Chavez swept into office with a mandate to break the corrupt oligarchy. He nationalized key industries across the country. Each takeover was celebrated as a victory for the people. But each acquisition removed experienced operators. The nationalization spread across every sector. Farms, factories, and banks fell under state control. Managers were replaced by political appointees with no experience. Production collapsed almost immediately. The question was no longer whether businesses would fail, but how fast. When Chavez took office, 13,000 companies operated in Venezuela. By 2016, only 4,000 remained. That is not a recession. It is a systematic liquidation of an economy. 9,000 businesses vanished through expropriation and price controls. Price controls made matters worse. The government forced merchants to sell goods below cost, hoping to make essentials affordable. Instead, producers stopped making them. Why manufacture something you are guaranteed to lose money on? Shelves empty. Smuggling flourished. In 2003, Chavez imposed strict currency controls to halt capital flight. The government fixed the exchange rate and dictated who could buy dollars. It was meant to be temporary. It became permanent, creating a shadow economy overnight. The official exchange rate told one story. The black market told another. A chasm opened between the official and real value of the currency. Those with political connections accessed cheap dollars. Everyone else paid exponentially more on the streets. Chronic shortages became the new normal. Venezuelans lined up for hours to buy milk, toilet paper, and medicine. The government blamed hoarders and speculators, but you cannot hoard what does not exist. The productive base was dismantled in real time, but the most catastrophic decision was yet to come. Chávez turned his attention to PDVSA, the state oil company. After the 2003 oil strike, he fired thousands of technical workers, replacing them with political loyalists. These were the geologists, engineers, and refinery operators who kept Venezuela among the world's top oil producers. Their replacements owed their jobs to ideology, not competence. The brain drain was irreversible. Oil production began its slow, inexorable decline. Oil output fell year after year. Revenue evaporated. The company that once fueled the economy was corroding from within. No investment, no maintenance, no expertise, just political slogans and promises that the revolution would produce miracles. So here is the question. Was this collapse inevitable under any government managing an oil-dependent economy? Or was it the ideological purge of expertise that doomed Venezuela? The answer might reshape how you see this crisis entirely. For a while, none of this seemed to matter. Oil prices surged to historic highs. The flood of petrodollars masked every structural flaw. Chávez spent lavishly on social programs, housing, and food subsidies. Poverty fell. The revolution appeared to work, but the prosperity was an illusion built on a single commodity. Venezuela was importing everything it needed to survive: food, medicine, even toilet paper. The country had stopped producing almost anything except crude oil, and now even that was declining. Think about what that means. A nation sitting on vast oil reserves could no longer feed itself. Every meal, every prescription, every gallon of gasoline depended on one barrel of oil. That is not an economy. That is a hostage situation. Then the tide went out. Oil prices crashed from historic highs to record lows in less than 2 years. The petrodollars stopped flowing. Suddenly, every structural flaw hidden beneath the surface was exposed at once. What do you think was the biggest hidden flaw that the crash revealed? There were no savings, no alternative industries, no productive base to fall back on. The currency controls made imports impossibly expensive. The nationalized companies produced nothing. The purged oil company pumped less and less. Venezuela was standing on a foundation of sand. The system seemed unbreakable while oil prices stayed high. But the foundation was already cracking. Venezuela stood completely exposed to any external shock. What came next would shatter the economy in ways few thought possible. By 2017, petroleum accounted for 95% of Venezuela's exports. But the oil that once built the nation's wealth was now flowing through cracked pipes. Years of underinvestment and political purges at the state oil company had hollowed out production capacity. The numbers tell a devastating story. Petroleum export values plummeted to just $22. $2 billion in 2017, a fraction of their peak. The golden goose was dying, and nobody seemed to notice. After the purge of PDVSA, production fell sharply. The brain drain was catastrophic. Experienced engineers who knew how to extract heavy crude were gone, replaced by appointees with no technical expertise. The machinery kept running, but nobody knew how to fix it. Venezuela desperately needed new partners. Trade with China surged from under $500 million before 1999 to $5 billion by 2009. Venezuela became Beijing's top investment destination in Latin America. But this new alliance carried a hidden cost. The Chinese money wasn't enough to replace the revenue lost from declining oil production. It was a bandage on a hemorrhage. Every billion that flowed in was already spoken for, committed to repaying earlier loans with interest. The trap was closing. In 2013, Nicolás Maduro took power following Chávez's death. He inherited an economy balanced on a knife's edge. But within months, global oil prices began a brutal collapse. The floor fell out from under everything the government had built. When oil prices were high, the government could fund its socialist programs, subsidizing food, housing, and healthcare. But as prices crashed dramatically, the math stopped working entirely. The promises became impossible to keep. Here is the critical question. When a nation that depends on oil for 95% of its exports sees that revenue collapse, what should it do? Diversify. Invest in other industries. Venezuela did none of these things. Instead, in 2014, Venezuela recorded the highest annual inflation rate in the world at 69%. Prices were climbing faster than anywhere else on the planet. This wasn't a warning sign anymore. It was the prelude to disaster. Ordinary Venezuelans felt it immediately. Groceries that cost a week's salary suddenly required a month's wages. Savings evaporated overnight. The bolivar was losing its meaning as a store of value with every passing day. The government's response to shrinking revenue wasn't to fix the economy. It was to print money. More bolivars flooded the streets, chasing fewer goods. This is the classic definition of a death spiral, and Venezuela was entering it fast. Meanwhile, the productive base vanished. Operating companies shrank from 13,000 in 1999 to just 4,000 by 2016. Nationalizations, price controls, and economic chaos destroyed 9,000 businesses in 17 years. Those shuttered companies meant fewer jobs, fewer goods, and less tax revenue. The economy wasn't just slowing down. It was being systematically dismantled. Each closure fed the next, creating a chain reaction that nobody in power tried to stop. Currency controls imposed in 2003 had already created a vast black market for dollars. Now, with fewer dollars coming in, the black market rate exploded. The gap between official and street exchange rates became an abyss that swallowed entire livelihoods. Was this collapse inevitable, or was it engineered by policy choices? Was the destruction caused primarily by government mismanagement or external forces? The truth is uncomfortable. Inflation had already reached 69% by 2014, before the major sanctions era began. Companies were closing by the thousands. The wounds were largely self-inflicted, carved deep into the economy's foundation. By 2018, the situation had deteriorated beyond what anyone thought possible. The annual inflation rate hit approximately 1,700,000%. The International Monetary Fund would soon project even darker numbers for the following year. The worst was still ahead. Venezuela's GDP would eventually shrink by 80%, a decline unprecedented outside of war or natural disaster. But this was no war. This was no earthquake. This was policy. And the death spiral was only beginning to accelerate. The economy had collapsed, but the humanitarian catastrophe was just beginning. Between 2013 and 2020, Venezuela's GDP shrank by an unprecedented 80%. This decline is unseen outside of outright war or total natural disaster. To cover massive fiscal deficits, the government turned to monetary financing. They simply printed more money. This reckless policy caused the bolivar to lose nearly all its value. It destroyed the life savings of millions overnight. The warning signs appeared early. In 2014, Venezuela recorded the highest annual inflation rate in the world at 69%. Most nations would panic. But for Caracas, this was merely the prelude to a devastating hyperinflationary spiral. How much worse could it get? The spiral soon surpassed Zimbabwe's notorious economic collapse. By 2018, Consumer prices soared so violently that the annual inflation rate hit approximately 1,700,000%. The bolivar was essentially worthless paper. How do you survive when your money is worthless? The International Monetary Fund projected that Venezuela's inflation would reach a staggering 10,000% by the end of 2019. This wasn't just a recession, it was a total monetary collapse. The productive base was systematically dismantled. In 1999, 13,000 companies operated in Venezuela. By 2016, only 4,000 remained. Economic chaos wiped out the nation's ability to produce basic goods. For more deep dives into global economic shifts, consider subscribing to the channel. Subscribe to uncover the hidden stories behind global crises. Oil exports, which accounted for 95% of total exports, plummeted in value. After the ideological purge of the state oil company, production collapsed from sheer mismanagement. By 2017, petroleum exports were worth only $22 billion. But as the economy imploded, a new variable entered the equation. The United States imposed heavy economic sanctions. The government in Caracas quickly blamed these foreign sanctions for the entire collapse. This shifted the narrative away from their own failures. The impact of these sanctions was devastating. A 2019 report estimated that American sanctions caused approximately $38 billion in losses between 2016 and 2019. This severely limited the government's ability to import essential goods or restructure its massive debts. The human cost was staggering. The same report attributed 40,000 excess deaths in 2017 and 2018 to the sanctions. However, this methodology was heavily disputed. Yet, facing economic ruin and international pressure, the state refused to yield. Instead of reforming, the government responded to growing protests with strict repression. They turned their security apparatus against their own desperate, struggling population. The crackdown was severe. United Nations reports documented 287 extrajudicial killings by the Special Action Forces in 2017 alone. These were not isolated incidents. They were systematic reprisals against those demanding basic survival. The repression continued unabated. In just the first half of 2019, another 569 extrajudicial killings were documented. The state had chosen force over reform. They enforced their policies through strict security measures. The humanitarian catastrophe was now undeniable. Hospitals lacked basic medicine, electricity grids failed, and millions fled across borders. The wealthiest nation in Latin America had been reduced to a cautionary tale. It was a story of ideological stubbornness and catastrophic mismanagement. The currency controls imposed in 2003 to halt capital flight birthed a vast black market. Citizens needed massive stacks of cash for basic goods. The bolivar became a symbol of national ruin. But the question remained, could any policy reverse this descent? The ideological purges of the state oil company meant there was no rescue plan. Technical experts vanished, replaced by political loyalists. Infrastructure crumbled and oil stopped flowing, cutting off the last source of revenue. Hyperinflation consumed what little remained. The central bank kept printing money to pay soldiers and bureaucrats, fueling the fire. Every new bill made existing currency worth less, trapping the nation in a fatal economic loop. The economy was completely dead, yet the regime's grip on power grew tighter than ever. The destruction was absolute. However, the most shocking part of this tragedy was still unfolding, waiting just across the border. By 2018, Venezuelan inflation hit a staggering 7 million%. The nation's GDP plummeted by 80% in just 7 years. This wasn't just a recession. It was an economic collapse unprecedented outside of outright war. The collapse forced millions to flee, creating a humanitarian crisis worse than many wartime scenarios. Families abandoned their homes carrying only what they could hold. An entire generation of skilled professionals vanished, leaving behind empty hospitals and silent factories. Caracas, once a gleaming symbol of Latin American prosperity, became a ghost town. Basic services collapsed. Water and electricity were rationed daily. The streets that once hosted luxury vehicles now echoed with the struggles of an impoverished population. The productive base was decimated. From 13,000 companies in 1999, barely 4,000 remained by 2016. Expropriations and currency controls didn't distribute wealth. They destroyed the engine that generated it. Even Lorenzo Mendoza, head of the food giant Empresas Polar, went from being publicly branded a parasite to a necessary partner by 2020. Why did the government suddenly need the industrialists they spent years destroying? Because ideology cannot feed people. The legacy of this collapse serves as a stark warning. When a government sacrifices productivity on the altar of absolute political control, the destination is always the same. Prosperity is replaced by poverty, and power becomes a hollow prize. Venezuela's tragedy wasn't merely the result of falling oil prices or international sanctions. It was a systematic, self-inflicted economic collapse. The wealthiest nation in Latin America was dismantled from within, piece by piece, by its own leaders' relentless pursuit of control. The ghost of Caracas stands as a monument to the dangers of ideological overreach. It reminds us that economies are not machines to be commanded, but delicate ecosystems. When you break the rules of productivity, the consequences are brutal and unforgiving. The lessons of Caracas echo far beyond its borders, reminding us that economic systems require balance. When leaders ignore reality, the damage lasts for generations. To see how similar policies reshaped other nations, watch our next video.